Secretary of State.
That was it. All right. I thank the Honourable Lady for her welcome, as is, I suspect, very common in the position of people entering Cabinet. I have had a very large number of congratulatory emails and telegrams. The best one, actually, was the shortest. It said, "Many congratulations, I now believe in the resurrection." But let me deal with the measures that she has raised. She accuses, the Labour Party accuses us of rank incompetence. The Labour Party. Yeah? The Prime Minister, when she was on her trip to China, described her approach to complex problems, and this is certainly a complex problem. She described it as collect the data and analyse it, make your judgment, make your decision, and implement it. The Labour Party clearly does it the other way round. Indeed, the Americans have a phrase for the way that they approach these things, not looking at the problem, not looking at the issue, not looking at the data. They call it load, fire, aim. Now, that might be very appropriate for the circular firing squad that's the Labour Party, but it's not appropriate to running the national interest. Now, she raised the issue of the points-based immigration system. What the Prime Minister said in China was very clear. What she wants is a results-based immigration system, one that actually delivers an outcome the British people voted for. And that's what she will be delivering at the end of this. She mentioned the Japanese ambassador. The Japanese ambassador this morning said, I have to do it from memory, but he said something to the effect that he had not met a company that did not think Britain was the best place in Europe to have its business. Not one. And that he admired the Prime Minister's approach to this negotiation. So I think she should pick her quotes a little more carefully. But let me come to the central point, if there was a point, in what she had to say.
There wasn't.
Article 50. Before we entered onto this course, there was a bill that went through this House, a referendum bill. It was voted for 6-1 in this House. She voted for it. She voted for it. Now, what did it say? It was presented by the Foreign Secretary at the time, and he said, "We are giving the British people the decision to make on this." Not advice, not consultation, the decision. And what she is trying to wrap up in a pseudo-democratic masquerade is the most anti-democratic proposal I have heard for some time. She wants to deny the will of the British people, and up with that we will not put.
Mr. Iain Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all start by welcoming my right honourable friend's return to the front bench. As someone who's recently left it voluntarily, I have to tell him, I unreservedly welcome him, and I also welcome his incredibly optimistic tone to the whole idea of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, forging a new relationship with the rest of the world. And on the specifics of the statement, can I just ask him, well, actually, the one specific, which is we are leaving the European Union. So on that specific, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I might press my right honourable friend. In the media today, we've had a certain amount of speculation about what the details are of actually what that means in terms of controlling our borders. Can I ask him, when he gets to the dispatch box, to confirm to us that in leaving the European Union, the number one thing that is absolutely not negotiable is that this United Kingdom will take control of its borders and the laws that are relevant to that, and that is not negotiable for any other deal.
Secretary of State.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. I'll say two things. The first thing is that in the referendum that we've just had, the biggest mandate ever given to a British government, a clear, large part of it was the question of immigration. And the Prime Minister has made it very plain that the current status of immigration cannot go on, and we will bring it to an end as a part of this process.
Mr. Stephen Gethins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I start by welcoming the Secretary of State to his new position and congratulating him? Can I continue by asking him, was that it? You've had all summer, Secretary of State. It has to be said, it is a mark of an irresponsible government, just as it was a mark of an irresponsible Leave campaign that we know nothing more about the phrase that Brexit means Brexit. Nothing more. Creating huge levels of uncertainty for our universities, research institutions who need some certainty beyond 2020, food and drink producers, EU nationals who have made this country their home and deserve much better. What reassurances can the Secretary of State give them? Because he's given them precious little from that statement today. And the actions of that government stand in stark contrast to those of the Scottish Government, who have reached out to EU nationals, who have set out clear action, including setting up an expert group, £100 million in economic stimulus, with more to come tomorrow in a programme for government. The Secretary of State was responsible for a Leave campaign that had no plans. Zero, zilch. All that stood in stark contrast to a 670-page white paper that the Scottish Government produced ahead of the independence referendum. Does he regret not having any more plans, especially now that we have the Prime Minister slapping down some of their ideas and the Foreign Secretary referring to access to the single market? Does he regret that blank piece of paper, Mr. Speaker?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm tempted to say, is that it again? I mean, the simple truth is that the honourable gentleman talked about a 670-page white paper for a Scottish referendum, which I'll remind him they lost. And they would still lose today. Because after the Brexit referendum, what do we see? Do the Scottish people want another referendum? No, they don't. Would they vote to leave? No, they wouldn't. And I think that's all I need to say to the honourable gentleman.
Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, I understand my right honourable friend's difficulties, and I congratulate him on not rushing anything, and I encourage him to take as long with his colleagues as he possibly can in working out a policy, and I look forward to hearing from again when the government have found something they can agree on which indicates what Brexit actually means. But meanwhile, on a more positive note, I don't recall my right honourable friend taking part in any of the ill-informed and sometimes prejudiced attacks on immigrants and foreigners living and working in this country. So can he confirm to me that he agrees with me that although some anti-foreigner rhetoric may have added a few votes that may have tilted the Leave campaign into a majority, he agrees with me that the majority of the public are not hostile to other Europeans living and working in this country, so long as they respect our laws and our customs. So will he confirm the government will not needlessly sacrifice our access to a free market to 500 people or our other trade and economic cooperations with our European allies just to demonstrate that we're turning away foreigners from this country who employers wish to employ to fill shortages of skills or the unwillingness of English people to fill vacancies in various parts of our economy?
Stay.
Well, my right honourable friend and I have debated this matter, I think, for probably nearly 30 years. Let me say this on the question of anti-foreigner rhetoric. I agree with him entirely that the sort of unpleasantness that sometimes has arisen out of this is to be wholly condemned. Wholly condemned. And I certainly join him in condemning that rhetoric. The issue, however, which he then moves on to, the question of immigration, I do not think that when people are concerned about immigration, it is xenophobia, necessarily. Right. There are economic, social and other pressures that lead to people being concerned about immigration. Neither do I think that it is a simple trade-off, that an immigration control system which suits our country is necessarily one that will preclude a good trade relationship with the European Union. Trade relationships are beneficial to both sides. We should not need to make a policy purchase in order to get such a relationship. So, whilst I agree with his original proposal, I don't agree with his conclusion.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will know that the business of his department will be the most important issue facing our country for decades, and it is hugely important that we get the best deal for Britain outside the European Union. No one expects him to have worked out all of the answers yet, but we do expect him to be able to set out the outline of some kind of plan, and today we have heard nothing on that. So let me ask him even just one specific question. Have they even looked, for example, at what the Home Affairs issues will be in the negotiations, and has he decided whether or not Britain will be staying in Europol, a decision that will have to be made this year, not in many years to come? Has he decided, will we be in Europol, yes or no?
Secretary of State.
The Honourable Lady was an eminent Cabinet member and indeed an eminent front bench member and Shadow Home Secretary. So I take her question extremely seriously, as she does this issue. The simple question is that the Justice and Home Affairs stream, the whole Justice and Home Affairs stream, is being assessed exactly as we speak, and the aim is to preserve the relationship with the European Union on security matters as best we can. She will remember that last year there was a decision which was made which laid aside about 100 measures which we didn't want to be a part of, but kept some, including the European arrest warrant and one or two others, controversially. She'll remember that. So yes, of course we're across that, and of course we are aiming to maintain that, and that's the answer.
Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend on his return to the government front bench after an unfortunate hiatus of some 20 years. Is it not absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that my right honourable friend has both the skills and the experience for the extremely difficult job which lies ahead? And surely, Mr. Speaker, the whole House will wish him every success as he charts those extremely difficult shoals.
I must admit I didn't hear the question. and flattering as it is, I don't intend to pay a fee for it either.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw.
Mr. Speaker, we learnt more from the Prime Minister's briefing of journalists in China of substance than we had in that 15 minutes about stakeholders and round tables. So could the Secretary of State please confirm that the points-based immigration system, the cut in VAT on fuel, and the £250 million extra every week for the NHS, the three main promises of the Leave campaign, now lie in tatters?
Hear, hear. State.
The task of my department is to deliver on three things. The British people in the referendum voted for return to Parliament of control of their laws, control of our money and control of our borders. And that's what my department will do. What happens then is down to the government and Parliament. But let me just deal with one aspect of what he said, the points-based immigration system. What the Prime Minister said in China was very clear. She was concerned that a points-based system was actually too open-ended, that it did not actually put a control on the number of people coming to the UK, and therefore she wanted something which sounded like it would be more rigorous, not less.
Mr. John Redwood.
47 countries have free trade agreements with the EU without accepting any EU control over migration in their countries or accepting any contributions to the EU. Will my right honourable friend confirm that taking back control cannot be negotiated with the French, Germans and the others? We take back control of those matters and we negotiate, if they wish, over trade. And would he further confirm that the French and German governments have indicated not at all that they wish to impose any tariffs on their very profitable trade with us because they don't believe in self-harm.
That last point goes really to the heart of the question, because free trade is not something which is a gift from one country to another. It's something which is mutually beneficial. And I fully expect that when we come to do our negotiation with the European Union, we will see them recognising France, Germany, all of them, every single one has a manufacturing surplus delivered to us. We have a service surplus the other way, typically. And I expect that we will both gain from the free trade agreement that comes out of that negotiation.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State to his place and also welcome his statement today and the visit that he made recently to Northern Ireland, where he met the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister and others. Can he give us a reassurance that as we seek to move forward and make a success of Brexit for the whole of the United Kingdom, which is what the British people in its entirety have voted for, all parts of it, can he reassure me, as a result of this national vote, and all members of the United Kingdom had an equal vote in that and have voted overwhelmingly to come out of the European Union, can the Secretary of State make it clear that he will work with ministers in Northern Ireland very, very closely, but not just at ministerial level, but that officials within his department will work very closely with officials in the Executive Office, the DFP and the Department of the Economy and others to ensure we make a success of this project?
Well, I can tell the right honourable gentleman that that's already happening, that the officials in my department and indeed other Whitehall departments are working with officials in the Northern Ireland office to proceed on what will be actually one of the more difficult elements of the negotiation, because we do have to deal with the issue of the border and keeping it open and not returning to the times of the recent past. But I also agree with him in with some depth in his statement that this is a national decision. A whole British nation, a whole United Kingdom nation that has decided on this. And whilst we will seek, and I look at the Scottish Nationalist benches when I'm saying this, whilst we will seek to meet and protect the interests of every part of the United Kingdom, that does not mean that any part of it will have a veto on it, least of all for partisan reasons.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
I welcome my right honourable friend to his responsibilities and further welcome his agreement to come before the Foreign Affairs Committee next week in order to provide further follow-up to this statement. Does he share my assessment that there is a key foreign security and defence interest for our 27 European Union partners in finding continuing engagement with the United Kingdom after Brexit?
My right honourable friend, the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, is absolutely right, and indeed this is fundamental to one of the points I was making in the course of my earlier remarks. There is a very strong security, foreign affairs, foreign policy, environmental, a whole series of relationships that will continue to apply long after we have left the European Union, to the benefit of both the European Union and the United Kingdom.
Hoey.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome most warmly the Minister to his new position, and I know that millions of Labour voters and supporters across the country who voted to leave will be pleased that there is someone in this position who genuinely wants to get out of the European Union. Can I just ask him to confirm that there is a real difference between wanting to be members of the single market and wanting to have access to the single market, and that some of the Remainers should really learn that?
The right honourable lady is right, and of course the access to the single market is actually not really up for grabs. It's there for everybody. There are many countries actually outside the European Union that do a better job, frankly, of exporting the single market than we do, even without a trade arrangement. So, of course, we want to have access to the single market, and we don't need to be a member of it to do it. Indeed, it's being a member of it that's caused some of the problems of sovereignty that this referendum was driven by.
Sir William Cash.
Congratulations, first of all, to my right honourable friend on his appointment. Will he confirm that the vote to leave requires the repeal of the European Communities Act 1972 And will the government bring in such a bill as soon as reasonably possible?
The aspects of the European Union European Communities Act 1972 that are required to be repealed, and those aspects of the acquis communautaire that need to be carried into British law are a very important joint set of issues that have to be decided. And once we've got to the point of deciding what we need to do there, we will come back to the House at the first possible opportunity.
Mr. Christopher Leslie.
Don't we need more specifics, really, from the Secretary of State? Don't we need to know, for example, that we can be building those new relationships and not just waiting until after the divorce proceedings finish? When Jean-Claude Juncker this weekend was saying that he doesn't like the idea of negotiating trade arrangements, wouldn't that just leave us in limbo? It's essential that we have the ability to get on with building those new relationships now. That means dealing with the Brexit issue at the same time, in parallel, as making sure that we forge those new relationships. We have to have them together, not one after the other. How is he going to secure that?
The Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. I mean, and indeed, the suggestion from the Commission that it's somehow illegal for my right honourable friend to go and talk to ministers in India or Canada or Australia or wherever it is that he's going to next is somewhat ridiculous. The only thing they can say in legal terms is that we cannot bring into force an agreement until after we leave. That's perfectly fair. That's perfectly proper. That's what the laws of the European Union are. And he can take it as read that that's what we are doing, that we are looking to make sure that we have the fastest transition to our other opportunities that I mentioned as fast as possible after Brexit concludes. Similarly, on the other front, there have been suggestions that somehow we can't talk about the trade arrangement with Europe until Article 50's process is concluded and we're outside the European Union. That, too, is nonsense. And I've looked very carefully at several different versions in different languages of Article 50. They all refer to effectively the parallel negotiation which will need to take place. So you can take it as read that on both those counts he's right, and on both those counts we are pursuing the matter.
Mr. Owen Patterson.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my honourable friend on his appointment and wish him well in his historic task? Mr. Speaker, many industries, many everyday activities depend on European regulation. There is some uncertainty being stirred up about the future of this law. Further to his reply to my honourable friend, the Chairman of the Select Committee, European Affairs Select Committee, can he confirm that the government is going about work establishing the entire corpus of European law, establishing all the detail of the acquis communautaire, and following the path set by countries such as India and Australia, who, when they took on full independence, converted the whole of British law into their national law, and then in subsequent years went through it, repealed, filleted, or improved upon it?
Yes, my right honourable friend makes a very good point, and it's one of the reasons this process is taking some time, because the legal interactions of these elements of the acquis communautaire and British law are not straightforward. My initial starting position was we would put them all into the law and take it from there. It doesn't quite work like that, and that's why it's taking a little while. But you can be quite sure that my legal section and the Whitehall lawyers are on that issue as we speak, and we'll come up with conclusions as quickly as we can. And when they do, I will tell the House what their conclusion is.
Dr. Ailey Whiteford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland's fishing communities were due to receive over €100 million in European Maritime and Fisheries Fund support between now and 2023. The Secretary of State today has committed to support our agricultural communities by guaranteeing CAP funding will be matched until 2020. Will he make a similar commitment to our fishing communities today to honour funding to the MMF in the current funding round?
Hear, hear.
Sadly, I didn't make the commitment. The Chancellor made the commitment, well, with great respect, it isn't to me to actually make commitments on behalf of the Treasury. But what I will say to her is this: he made the commitment. If she reads, and we'll put a copy of the letter in the library, which he laid out the underpinning of the CAP and the underpinning of structural funds and science funds and so on. And he made the point very clearly that this was effectively his decision until the autumn statement. Right? So what I would say to her, and I will reflect it to him myself, is what she has said, so that before the autumn statement he is at least aware of her concerns. Yeah?
Mr. Peter Lilly.
One of the legitimate concerns of many Remain voters, which those of us on the Leave side can well understand, was a fear that an unduly long period of uncertainty while negotiations were going on would be damaging for the British economy. Could my right honourable friend therefore confirm that it will be his priority to complete this process as soon as possible, that the 2 years limit set down in Article 50 is an arbitrary maximum, not a necessary minimum, and that most countries which have obtained their independence or left a political union, like India, or Canada, or Australia, or Czech and Slovak republics, have done so in far less than 2 years?
I defer to his knowledge of history on the other countries. What I will say to him is this. The Prime Minister has said that we will not trigger Article 50 until the new year. The reason for that is not unnecessary delay or wasting of time. The reason for that is to make sure that we get all of the decisions absolutely right. He's heard in the last few minutes about some of the complexities involved in the acquis communautaire alone. So what we will do is we will trigger Article 50 as soon as is reasonably possible. I would rather be a month late and get it right than be a month early and get it wrong. But nevertheless, that's what we will do, and we will do so as expeditiously as possible. The Prime Minister again has said in very clear terms that she thinks the British people expect us to get on with this.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, unravelling 40 years of close cooperation within the European Union with 27 nation-states now is, as the Right Honourable Gentleman is learning, if he didn't know before, a very complex issue. Does he intend to give the House some ongoing view of how that is going? And can you give some assurance on such issues as workers' rights, equal pay for work of equal value? Will we still be keeping that? Will the EU laws which guarantee our pension payments as if they are deferred wages still be recognised by this House? And he talks about the sovereignty of Parliament. Will he give this Parliament much more of a say on the deal that is done? And is his government intending to give the British people a say on the deal when it's finally done?
He loves democracy.
Well, I'll start by saying that we got our instructions from the British people to do this in the first place. But she does raise some very serious issues. I mean, firstly, yes, of course. My views on the importance of parliamentary accountability have not changed because I've moved 4 benches forward. And I still believe that we should be as open with Parliament as it is possible to be in a negotiation. I am, for example, appearing in front of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in a week or two's time, an undertaking I made some time ago. I'm doing the same with the House of Lords Committee on the same. As for the question of employment rights, I would say that a very large component of the people who voted to leave the European Union could be characterised as the British industrial working class. And it is no part of my brief to undermine their rights. Full stop.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State to his new role. I think he's absolutely right that we need to respect the result of the 23rd of June, and there's also right that people wanted further controls on immigration. They don't feel confidence in the immigration policy that we've had. But there seem to be 2 words missing from his statement. I don't know whether it's deliberate or not, and they're the words single market. And isn't it the heart of this matter we're going to be arguing about the next few months and years, that balance between access to the single market and the freedom of movement of people to come to this country? When will the government set out its view on that fundamental point?
I'm afraid I start from a disagreement with the Right Honourable Lady. The simple truth is, as I did say earlier, that the negotiation over free trade with the European Union is something which will be to the benefit of both sides. It will be beneficial to us and beneficial to the European countries themselves. The question of immigration and control of immigration is a very high priority for this government, as the Prime Minister has made plain on many occasions. So I'm afraid I don't agree with the fundamental tenet of her question. I do not think that is a natural, necessary trade-off. I think the negotiation has got to be very much on what is in the mutual benefit of this country and the European Union. Full stop.
Al Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 45 Japanese companies operate in Wales, supporting some 6,000 jobs, mainly in tech manufacturing. Manufacturing itself is worth £9 billion to the Welsh economy. What assurances can the Secretary of State give to those workers and to those companies that Wales-Japan relations and the Welsh economy itself will not be harmed by Brexit?
Well, it's the same assurance I give to all manufacturing operations in the United Kingdom. The aim of this negotiation is to deliver the best trade opportunity that we possibly can. And that includes getting the best arrangement with the European market and also exploiting the best arrangements with other non-European markets. And I'll make a point to him on manufacturing alone that the quantity of exports that we make to the European Union is exceeded by the exports we make to those countries with whom we have no free trade agreement at all. So once we get a free trade agreement, or many of them, as my right honourable friend will do, but I shan't steal his thunder, as soon as we get those free trade agreements, we won't see downsides, we'll see opportunities.
Ah, yes, a most exotic delicacy in the House. Mr. Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on his long overdue return to ministerial office? In the 7 short weeks since he has been in office, alongside our new Foreign Secretary and our new Secretary of State for International Trade, we have seen a record increase in service industries growth, a record increase in manufacturing industry growth, a 3.3% increase in motor car sales, and we have also seen the Speaker of the US Congress, the Prime Minister of Australia and the Prime Minister of New Zealand all pressing for free trade deals with this country, while the Deputy Chancellor of Germany has acknowledged that the EU-US trade deal is dead in the water. Does that not confirm that the 17 million people who voted to leave the European Union in this country know a darn sight more about economics than the members of the IMF, the OECD, the IFS and all these other soi-disant experts who have on their face?
My right honourable friend is not known for understating his case, but I would point out it was 17.5 million people that made that judgment. And he's right. He's right. Much of the gloom and doom, the fear-mongering that went on before the referendum has been proven to be wrong. That being said, I would not be quite so unalloyed optimistic as he is, because of course we're in a world at which there are a lot of economic pressures going on. That's why the meetings in China are going on now. So I think that he makes his point brilliantly, as always, and I agree with the main thrust of it, but let's not get too optimistic before we close the deal.
Mr. Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State said he wants to have the supremacy of this Parliament. If we are a sovereign, supreme Parliament, why is this Parliament not going to have a decision as to when we trigger Article 50?
We did. It was called a referendum act, and it was passed by 6 to 1 in this Parliament.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all congratulate my right honourable friend on his complete and abysmal failure over a 10-year period to avoid high office. It's a great pleasure to see him in his place. May I also reassure him that as somebody who supported the Remain campaign, I see it as my absolute duty to support the government in giving effect to the public desire to leave the European Union, including supporting the government in its implementing of Article 50. My right honourable friend rightly pointed out that the matter is legally extremely complex. It also concerns, as he rightly said, the acquis communautaire, which is about the conferring of private legal rights on individuals in this country which have the force of statute. And I have to say to my right honourable friend that the idea that those should simply be revoked by our exit without parliamentary approval troubles me very much and appears to me to be an abdication of the responsibility of this House. Now, I accept that in many cases they've been created by Henry VIII clauses, which was the unsatisfactory nature of the EU. But actually what we will now do, if we cannot scrutinise them before Article 50 is invoked, is allowing the government to dispose of private property rights, including intellectual property as an example, by decree. And I have to say to him that troubles me very much, and I'd ask him to use his ingenuity to find ways of resolving this particular dilemma.
Well, it's a pleasure to hear from my right honourable friend and long-term friend. But he's over-interpreting what I've said, I think, because Article 50 is the beginning of this process. It's not the end. And there will, I am sure, well, I know, there will be many opportunities for this House to scrutinise what we are about to do after Article 50 takes place. But of course it's somewhat futile before we actually start the negotiation, because some of those negotiations will have direct impact on the very rights he's talking about. But he can take it from me. I didn't spend all those years on the backbenches defending those rights to give them up now.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that it would be a good idea to try and find some way of maintaining a form of cooperation on foreign policy after we leave the European Union? Because even after exit, we will still very much be part of Europe, and there are a great number of challenges around the world on which we will have to continue to work with our European neighbours.
The right honourable gentleman was absolutely right, and the tradition of this country in maintaining strong, effective alliances, generally for good, in the world at large, is one that I fully expect will continue. Indeed, one aspect of the picture of the future that I see is that there will be, Britain will continue to be a good global citizen, as it always has been, and cooperation on foreign policy is very much a part of that.
Mrs. Cheryl Gillan.
May I add my congratulations to the others, to my right honourable friend. It's good to see him back in his natural habitat, the dispatch box. Businesses in the UK are not just concerned about access to the single market. They are concerned about other matters. And a unitary patent and the proposed new unitary patent court, a unified patent court, has been eagerly anticipated by businesses who currently have to, at great cost, apply for separate patents in separate countries. Now, the UK was due to ratify this later this year alongside Germany and one other country. Could my right honourable friend give business the undertaking that the UK will ratify this agreement at before the end of this year, and who will continue to play a full part so British businesses benefit from being able to be part of a larger unified patent authority?
I'll say this to my right honourable friend, that for as long as we are a member of the European Union, which is going to be, by the sounds of it, at least 2 years, we will meet all our obligations and we will take our responsibilities extremely seriously, including the ones she's outlined.
Can I just very gently ask the Secretary of State to face the House?
I beg the Speaker.
Sometimes his answers aren't fully heard. They're heard by the person at whom he's looking, but not by the House.
All I can do is plead inexperience.
If not youth. Yes. Mr. Frank Field.
May I congratulate the Secretary of State for his return to the front bench, and may I thank him for the statement he's made on behalf of all those Labour constituencies that voted to leave. and in making the control of our borders the cornerstone of any renegotiations. But might I take him back to the question the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Woking, asked? Given the huge trade surplus Europe has with us, how does he think that power position will play out when we're talking about membership of or access to the single market?
Well, it is early days to forecast the negotiation, but he's quite right. There is a large trade surplus. I mean, the one that was cited over and over again during the course of the referendum campaign, I don't want to revisit it, but was the surplus in cars from Germany alone, for example. And with the European Union facing economic difficulties, I don't think they're going to want to create problems for themselves in creating bilateral arrangements which hurt themselves. So the way I think it will play out is over the course of the period concerned, and as I say, probably a couple of years or so, people will start to focus on what their own national interest is. My experience of the European Union is that the Commission makes a great deal of public statements, but at the end of the day, it's the national interest of the individual countries that actually decides the outcome.
Mr. Andrew Tidy.
The Secretary of State confirmed that since the UK will want to be able to negotiate new trade deals with the rest of the world and has created a department for that very purpose, that it won't be able to remain a member of the Customs Union.
I'm pleased to be asked a question by my honourable friend. I spent the weekend reading his draft for Open Europe, was it? In which I didn't agree with everything in it, but I'd say, as always with him, what he has to say was insightful and wise. I recommend people read pages 10, 11 and 12 if they haven't got a lot of time. But to come to this point on Customs Union, he's got, of course, a very good point. The membership of a Customs Union puts restrictions of varying possible degrees on what you can do outside. It will put restrictions on what my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for International Trade, is doing. So we have to look at it carefully. There are a range of different types of Customs Union, but that is exactly the sort of decision that we will resolve before we trigger Article 50.
This is Margaret Ritchie.
Speaker, last week the Secretary of State visited Northern Ireland where he met political and business leaders, and this week he will visit Dublin. And in view of that, whilst it's true that the desire for a continued open border in Ireland is shared by many, does the Secretary of State recognise that maintaining an open border in Ireland will require agreements between Dublin, London, Belfast and Brussels? And what steps has the Secretary of State taken to ensure that such an agreement will be possible?
Well, it will primarily require an agreement between London, Belfast and Dublin. I mean, Brussels will have a say, but in some respects, but it's down to us. And what I can say to her is that when I was in Northern Ireland last week, everybody was absolutely clear, all sides, there was no political divide, no division of any sort on the need for an open border, a need to avoid a return to the days of the hard border. And there are other open borders which we will be studying. And one of them's Norway-Sweden. It's not identical. Of course, there was an open border before either of us were members of the European Union. And, of course, we had the common travel area before we were members of the European Union. So there are ways to deal with this. Some of them may be technological, some of them may be political. But I can say to her this, that we, and I think the Irish government and all the political parties in Belfast, are absolutely committed to making sure it happens.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I too welcome my right honourable friend to his place on the front bench, and also say that I too accept the verdict of the British people, some 52% of course who voted for us to leave the European Union. Yesterday the Japanese government produced a 15-page document, very unusually, being very bold about their assessment of the grave dangers as they see it of Brexit. And they laid it out in some detail. Of course, there are many who would argue that if we retain our membership of the single market, then we can allay their fears, especially in relation to the financial services sector and the automotive sector. With great respect to my right honourable friend, I think we need some clarity now about where we see our membership of the single market. Is he saying that this government is prepared to abandon that membership of the single market?
What I'm saying is that this government is looking at every option. But the simple truth is that if a requirement of membership is giving up control of our borders, I think that makes it very improbable. What I would also say to her is this, that what we are looking for, in the words of the Prime Minister, is a unique solution, one which matches the fact that we are one of the largest trading countries in the world. And as a result, we're a very large market for very large parts of very important industries in the European Union. I find it very difficult to believe that over the course of the next couple of years or so, we will not be able to find an outcome which satisfies not just our own industry, but of course those industries sponsored by Japan as well.
Mr. Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a significant reason why my constituency voted to leave because of immigration and free movement of labour. So can I ask the Secretary of State whether at the end of this process, under no circumstances will free movement of labour be allowed? And he also said in his statement that, that they'll bring the current rate of immigration to an end. What does that mean?
I was frankly virtually verbatim quoting the Prime Minister, who said in terms that free movement as it is now cannot go on.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, my constituency voted more decisively than the country for Brexit, and so my constituents will welcome both the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State's clear view that we are going to leave and do that decisively. But businesses in my constituency will also be wanting to get the right result for their export, so I think they will welcome the thoughtful and careful approach set out by the Secretary of State, and I would urge him to continue that careful approach to make sure we get this right, not rush to make decisions as the front bench opposite want us to, when we're in danger of them not getting the right deal, both for my constituents and for the country as a whole.
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. I promise him I will take no lessons from the Labour Party in organisation.
Liz Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I press the Secretary of State on the issue raised by the Right Honourable Member for Broxtowe? Japanese companies employ 140,000 people in the UK, and the Japanese government says these companies need to maintain tariff-free trade, consistency of regulation between the UK and EU, passporting rights for financial services, and continued access to EU workers. In order to minimise uncertainty for these vital companies and their employees, can the Secretary of State say whether he's going to prioritise any of those criteria, and if not, which ones will he pursue?
We've made it pretty plain already, I think, at this stage in the statement. Those are issues, all of them. Passporting, access to markets, she names it. They're all issues that are being looked at and evaluated in terms of where the real risks are. I mean, for example, let me just take passporting. I have consulted with a number of people in the city on passporting. I get very, very different views. The city is not really a single business, it's a sort of ecosystem of businesses, and you get different views from each of them. And some of them have different solutions too. Some of them have brass plate arrangements and so on. We have to assess all of that before we decide exactly how we organise the strategy. It's pretty straightforward, as my right honourable friend who spoke just now pointed out. It's straightforward, but it's complex to calculate, complex to work out, and we will do that.
Straightforward but complex. Mr. Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also congratulate my right honourable friend on securing his position, and also appreciate what he had to say about both taking time to get this right and building a national consensus, because it is right, regardless of how we all voted on this, we must make a success of this. Can I ask him whether he is sufficiently confident now that there is clear delineation between the interests of his department, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and international trade, to make sure that there is no conflict of interest between them, so that due credit can be given to the success of negotiations as they go on? And in terms of parliamentary scrutiny, does he envisage himself coming before a select committee based upon his own department alone, or some other arrangement, and if so, when?
On that last point, it would be very dangerous for any Secretary of State, when I was still on the backbenches, to try and tell the backbenches how they would organise their select committees. I would certainly not have accepted it then, and I'm not going to go into that particular trap now. In terms of relationships with the Foreign Office and the Department for International Trade, we have very, very clear purposes. Very clear purposes. Mine is effectively a support for the Prime Minister, who is the leader of this exercise. The Department of International Trade has the task of really exploiting the enormous opportunity that this actually creates. And the Foreign Office, as he will well know from his own experience, has plenty on its plate too, but will act in a sympathetic and supportive way in establishing all the relationships and building all the alliances which will actually deliver a positive outcome at the end of these 2 years.
Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can also congratulate the Secretary of State on his appointment. In March, the Secretary of State for Scotland stated that our access to the single market of 500 million people reduces costs for Scottish businesses by removing barriers to the export market, currently worth around £11.6 billion. Can I ask the Secretary of State what evaluation he himself has made on the impact of exiting the EU to the Scottish economy?
Hear, hear.
Well, it's a pleasure to hear from the Honourable Lady and my old ally on other subjects, we say. We haven't yet done that calculation, but we will. The simple truth is that this is, she crystallises really rather well the sort of task we have to do in the next few months, and that is to... The Honourable Lady is now trying to give me organisational advice. I suggest she focuses on her own party first and worries about us next. So she's absolutely right. That is exactly the sort of thing we have to assess, and we will assess and do it carefully, because I intend to... Sorry, I beg your pardon. I intend to deliver on our undertaking that we are going to make sure that this outcome serves all parts of the United Kingdom.
Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, I was very grateful that my right honourable friend appeared to accept the principle that when we repeal the European Communities Act, we should transpose EU law into UK law. Given that EU law currently applies in the UK, does he accept that any complexity which may be apparent today would apply whether or not we repealed that European Communities Act, since that body of law applies? And will he therefore be very careful that paid advisers, perhaps paid by the day, are not bringing forward complexity in order to extend their fees?
As far I know there's been a great revolution in employment law, but I don't think any of my civil servants are paid by the day. I take his point. We will make sure that we consult widely on that. We do not rely on some single source. This is part of the issue through this. So many of the legal and technical issues we deal with, we get different sets of advice from different components of the same industry. And the same is true here. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to resolve it properly before we act.